So my name's Paula Demain and I work for a company called Orchid, and it's a startup company. We're now 5 years old. We celebrated our 5th birthday in October last year. So I am the community team lead at Orchid, so I support our member organisations and individuals within Europe, Middle East and Africa. So we're a global team. We have around 30 staff that are supporting this initiative. So I just would like to see a raise of hands. Who's actually heard of Orchid? Oh, that's better than I thought. And who actually has an Orchid identifier? Great, that's great news. So I just wanted to start today with what our vision is. So Orchid's vision is a world where all who participate in research, scholarship and innovation are identified, uniquely identified by a persistent identifier and connected to their contributions and affiliations across times, disciplines and borders. So what actually is Orchid? So Orchid is an identifier for researchers. So this is a 16-digit persistent identifier that identifies you from other researchers or scholars that have the same name as you. So we're also a registry, so these 16-digit Orchid IDs are held within a registry where each Orchid ID has an Orchid record. We have currently over 4.5 million Orchid records. That's obviously great news. Each of those, as I said, has an Orchid record where you can enter information about your affiliations, your works, your funding, any peer review activities that you've done. And depending on the visibility settings that you have set on your Orchid record, other people can then read that information from the record. Orchid is a set of standard procedures, so this is through the API. So as I mentioned, those Orchid records, we do have individuals populate the Orchid records themselves, but what we really do and what we really want to is work with member organisations that are feeding that information into the Orchid records. So when I say member organisations, we're working with research organisations, funders and publishers. So for research organisations, they're collecting Orchid IDs from their researchers, and they might be doing that through institution repositories or through research information management systems. And by collecting that ID, they can then interact with the user's record depending on the permissions that they've been granted. So the primary role of research organisations is to assert an affiliation into the researcher's Orchid record. And by having the member organisation do that, we see that as a trusted assertion within the wider community. So somebody looking at that Orchid record can see the source of where that data has come from. So they might see like the University of Oxford. That source is more trusted in the community than having the individual themselves saying that they work at the University of Oxford. The next part on the Orchid record is the grant section. So when you're applying for a grant, we have many grant application systems now that are asking for Orchid IDs. Wellcome and the National Institute of Health Research are collecting Orchid IDs. And then if your grant was successful, they can then push the award data into the Orchid record. And by doing that, the research organisation can then also see that information depending on the visibility settings of the record. So, and then also when you're applying for that grant application system is reading that Orchid record and they're pulling in the information about your affiliation that the research organisation has added to the record. And by having that as a trusted source, the grant application is a lot more trusted. And then the last part is the publisher's role within this. So the publisher's sector's role is to obviously assert the work, so authorship of the records. So many publishers now have mandated Orchid IDs at submission system. So when you submit a manuscript, you'll be asked for your Orchid ID. They're then collecting that. They include it in the metadata that's sent to Minter DOI, and then that information is then pushed back into the Orchid record, either by cross-ref data sites or the publisher themselves. So this is our committed community of building connections. So we have over 800 members that are working with us on this initiative to import information into ORCID records. They're not just importing, they're also exporting information from the records to help reduce the administration burden on researchers themselves. So we're also an international scale open research effort, so we're working with organisations and individual researchers themselves for this initiative to work. So why a persistent ID? So we need a persistent ID for individuals, just like we have for works and places. So organisations have IDs, individuals need IDs too. So some of the challenges that individuals face, I spoke about some of them, the administrative burden, they have limited control of personal data. One of the biggest issues is the name ambiguity, so this is obviously researchers with the same name, and being recognised for the work that you're doing. So how are you getting the credit for that work? Some of the challenges that organisations face, again, is the name issue, having trust in the metadata that they're receiving, having siloed systems. So some organisations have systems that aren't actually talking to other systems, so it's how they're getting that information from that system to other systems. So why is there a problem? So what we're trying to achieve is to resolve the name ambiguity issue for researchers so they can be recognised for their work. So there's on this slide we've got some variations of names for individuals and for institutions. So Matthew Bayes is our regional membership director. So he has different ways that his name could be out there. And if you search for MJ Bayes, you get quite a lot of information back about Michael Jackson. Obviously, that's not what you're looking for. And institution variations of names too. We're a company, as I said, we're 5 years old, but as you can see from this slide, there's already different names out there of how we can be searched on the web. So what we're hoping with this 16-digit unique ID, if you search for that on Google of Matt's ORCID ID, you will see Matt's ORCID record. So you've found a direct result search. So this was a tweet from a while back now. So this is just, it's quite an extreme one. It's not always like this. So this is where they're saying they're the 38th author, but they haven't finished. They're the 38th author on a article with the name Wang. So if I just show you on the next slide here, you can see here all these Wangs, and there are quite a few as well that have the initial C Wang. So it's how are we identifying these people? And by having this ORCID ID, this unique identifier, this is how we're planning to identify these people from other researchers with the same name. So I have a video to show you. Hopefully it will work. Let's see.
Meet Sophia Maria Hernandez Garcia. She is an active and accomplished scholar in her field. She does research, writes and publishes, teaches, speaks at conferences, the things that most researchers and scholars do throughout their career. She has done her work at several different organizations and has been fortunate to receive grants to support her research. Sophia wants to concentrate her time and energy on her scholarship, though sometimes things get in the way. Funding organizations want to review her past work before making an award. Her institution needs her to provide a complete list of her works for her promotion review. Potential collaborators are trying to figure out if she is the Sophia Garcia they're looking for. The internet, repositories, and other resources can help answer some of these questions, but they all have the same core challenge. They attempt to link research activities and researchers based on the spelling of a person's name. As individual as we each are, our names are actually not that unique. Even in the same field or institution, there can be others with similar or even the exact same name. And it can get even worse if you consider all of the potential variations of a name. Names can change over time, are sometimes expressed in different ways in different situations or languages. So when someone searches for Sophia, they may or may not find all, and only the things that can be attributed to her work. Today, many institutions and agencies solve this problem with paperwork. They ask Sophia to fill in forms, to list her works, and include her affiliations and funding history. Some may even ask her to list her collaborators along with their past work, affiliations, and funding. What is related to Sophia's work and what is not? There has to be a better way. ORCID IDs are unique and persistent identifiers specifically for researchers, analysts, and scholars. With an ORCID ID, Sophia can clarify what activities are hers, regardless of how her name is expressed. Sophia registered for a free ID at the orchid.org website. ORCID is a nonprofit organization that allows our users to control what data are linked to their identifier and how those data are made public, shared with a limited group, or made private. The community may access data made public by our users for no fee, and also attach it to her organization and any new public research activities she engages in, such as publishing a paper, releasing a data set, or applying for a grant. With the ID attached to her activities, it makes it easier for people, institutions, and systems to figure out which activities are Sophia's, even if her name doesn't always appear in the same way, distinguishing her from others with the same or similar name. ORCID IDs are collected and used internationally by many institutions, including publishers, repositories, professional associations, universities, funders, and research organizations. In addition to attaching her ID to new activities, Sophia can allow these organizations to read her ORCID record to get her already curated list of past activities. Best of all, if Sophia leaves her current institution, the ID travels with her, along with the list of all of her past activities. She can continue to use the same ID throughout her career, even if she changes employers, moves to another country, or starts to do work in another field. By linking the ORCID ID to her work when submitting a manuscript, applying for a grant, or registering for a meeting, Sophia ensures that the organization she works with can get the information they need with less paperwork for her. It means people will find all and only her work when they search the internet. Sophia can spend her time concentrating on what matters most, and that makes her very happy. Get your ORCID ID today. It only takes 30 seconds to register for one and is completely free. ORCID, connecting research and researchers.
So that's it for today. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Nope.